Kia ora, everybody. Welcome to our afternoon session. Those that are just joining us, we've just had our AGM. Really good, but very fast meeting. Welcome everyone to our afternoon presentation. I'm not going to talk for long. I want to introduce Robyn O'Brien. She's the founder of Replant Capital and our first speaker today. Really pleased to have Robyn here. She is got fires all around her, so she knows all about climate change very firsthand, and she's got really special ties back to New Zealand with her own whānau living here. And some of you may have seen her speak actually at the Organic Wine Growers Conference. We're really lucky to have her as have her on our advisory board, and I'd really like you all to join me in welcoming Robyn as she talks through a more holistic view of capital.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much for having me, everyone. It's an incredibly special honor to speak to you today. My mother is from New Zealand. She grew up in Havelock North, and that whole side of my family is there, all on the North Island. Aunts and uncles in Auckland and Wellington, cousins across the country, and now those cousins have babies. And I think the timing of this conversation for New Zealand couldn't be more poignant or more important. You have led the world with your examples of compassion and intelligence and leadership for such a long time, not only under this current administration, but for years prior. And I think in a world that is right now in such a chaotic state, whether we're talking about climate or we're talking about politics, to see that kind of grounded composure that is New Zealand, and yet it is also infused with that love and that passion. It is really an important time to have this conversation in New Zealand, and I'm honored to be part of this. I'm named after a farmer in Palmerston North. Her name is Robyn Tanner. We had the absolute joy and privilege of spending Christmas and the holidays on her farm this past year, right before COVID hit. I came back to the States, and to see how leadership can influence policy, whether we're talking about a food system or a healthcare system, it's incredible the impact that can have. And I think New Zealand is in an incredibly special place right now to be able to have this really vibrant conversation. Part of the reason that I'm coming to you today is because of that tie to the New Zealand farmer, and to really share how what we did wrong here has completely impacted our farm economy. And as I was listening and learning about what was happening in New Zealand, I had these conversations with friends in New Zealand saying, how can I help and share what we have done here, the mistakes that we have made here, in order to help New Zealand avoid making those same mistakes, because we have made a lot of them. And it has polarized not only the political system around food, but it has also polarized the policy around food. And as we were defining our organic standard in the United States, there were things that now in hindsight were completely obvious that we completely left out. And it was things like soil. And in our organic definition, we don't actually include the word soil, which if you think about it is kind of crazy. And it has led to this tension now in the United States between the organic movement and the regenerative movement. And in the United States, the organic industry, 80% of Americans now are buying something organic. It is it's growing, it's accelerating. And 75% of all grocery store categories now carry something organic. So the selfish part of me, knowing the New Zealanders that I do, I was thinking, how can New Zealand farmers benefit from this growth? How can they benefit by selling New Zealand product into the US and into these marketplaces where 80% of us are trying organic food? Because the problem we have here in the US is that only 1% of our farmland is organic, which is crazy. So you've got 80% of consumers trying organic products and only 1% of farmland is organic. And as we look to what will it take to convert that farmland, a lot of people, as we talk about ingredients, people get into these arguments and discussions around pesticides and the toxicity of pesticides, and the industry will roll out scientists saying it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, and then independent scientists can come out and say, be careful, be careful, be careful, and you get into this he said, she said debate around the use of these pesticides. But again, that doesn't have the farmer at the center of the conversation. And what we're realizing is that by not having the farmer at the center of the conversation, we're lacking that insight and that wisdom. And here in the United States, our US farmers now, because of the agrochemical system that they embraced, now carry $426 billion in debt. And so if you speak to farmers, the average farm income is now negative $1,800. So if I was a 30-year-old and I was thinking about going into farming and I had 3 young children, what in the world would make me want to step into that model where I've got to take out more and more and more loans and get into further and further and further debt in order to finance the acquisition of this portfolio of chemicals? They are looking at that model, young farmers in the United States, and they're saying, I don't want to do that. And so we have a legacy crisis that's now happening on our farms, where 4th and 5th generation farmers, suddenly their children are saying, I don't want to step into that model. I don't want to step into that debt level. I don't want to step into that agrochemical use and everything that's required to finance that. So as we began to meet with farmers, you know, there were farmers who were saying, if I can convert my farmland, if I can transition off of this agrochemical model that has me so in debt, my children are interested in coming back to the farm. What does that look like? And when you talk to farmers, it's about equipment financing. It's about technical expertise and teaching them how to begin to engage with cover crops and how to build soil health. And that's not something that they want to hear from me. We're simply providing the capital. They need these technical assistance partners that then our team then works with to be on the ground in the field with them. And it's going to be different for different growers. It's going to be different for different regions. And again, this concept of one size fits all is really what got us into trouble in agriculture. And it's, again, how do you regionalize that? How do you localize these solutions? And what the farmers are realizing is that instead of financing the chemical input model, which directly benefited these agrochemical companies, they can finance the services model. And so they can hire these consultants, these crop consultants, these farm consultants, these technical expertise consultants to be on farm and really walk them through building soil health. And if you talk to farmers in the United States, what they'll say is, you know, regenerative agriculture to them means fewer chemical inputs that they have to go into debt to finance and stronger soil health. And so, you know, for them, it's learning about soil health. The beauty is as they learn those soil health processes, you can't unlearn that. And as they learn about water conservation and water infiltration and how to build soil organic matter, you can't unlearn that. And so all of a sudden, that's the stewardship and the practice that then becomes embraced on that farm. But all of that requires capital. And the challenge for a lot of the farmers is they're so in debt, they don't have any kind of flexibility or generosity of space to be able to engage in that transition model. So you've got to think about capital as the most important ingredient in the food system. And if you do that, you know, the conventional capital has always kind of come at them with these traditional terms and these traditional loans. And it tends to come from these big banks that have sort of had this standard operating procedure for the last several decades. And at Replant, we thought, you know, what would it look like if instead of trying to use conventional finance to transition agriculture to regenerative organic agriculture, what does regenerative capital look like? And how can we actually think about capital in the terms of those loans differently? And as we sat down with farmers, the farmers were saying, you know, everybody's talking about how we can use soil to draw down carbon and that soil can serve as this powerful carbon sink. And the farmers are saying, but we've been doing that forever anyway. That's something that we've known intuitively that we've always done on farm. And all of a sudden you have all of these models. I was on a call yesterday with Australia, different companies that are really trying to build the mechanics around carbon sequestration and the ability of the soil to capture the carbon, how you're going to measure that and everything else. What we thought about was how can you actually tie the cost of capital to soil health? So if a farmer decides to engage in this transition and build soil health and reduce chemical inputs and the debt levels associated with financing those chemical inputs, if the farmer engages in that, then you tie that to a lower cost of capital. So the stronger the ability for him to capture carbon, the stronger the carbon metrics prove, the lower the cost of capital. The stronger the water infiltration metrics prove, the lower the cost of capital. The stronger the water conservation metrics, the lower the cost of capital. The stronger the soil organic matter, the lower the cost of capital. So soil is this incredible database that is full of information and it is full of data that is telling us in real time about the viability of not only the food system, but about the viability of this asset to serve in the carbon sequestration process. So if the farmer is the steward of that soil, we believe the farmer should be compensated for that, and tying that to the cost of capital. And, again, that comes out of decades of experience of working with farmers, decades of experience working with these multinational global food companies. And if you compare that to a lot of the capital that is financing agriculture around the world, that tends to come from the banks, and they don't know what they don't know. And there's not a lot of diversity in the representation and leadership that are at those banks. And for us, we thought you have to put the farmer in the center of this conversation. And one of the most personal reasons I think that this issue is something that I am so passionate about, will be something I do until I am done. And it's why I am so committed to offering any support that I can to New Zealand, is because we are now realizing that what we do to the soil, how we treat the soil, is actually how we treat our children. So if we are going to chemically introduce these products onto the soil, you have to connect the dots that we are also chemically introducing those products onto the food products that we're feeding our children. And when I was down there last year, I was standing in the government offices in the Beehive in Wellington, and we looked out, and someone had said, that's where the new National Cancer Center is going to go. And I thought, we have made that same mistake here in the United States. Instead of really addressing this at the starting gate, which is at the food system, at the farm level, we should be paying our farmers to keep us healthy rather than paying the doctors to make us better. And in the United States, 1 in 2 men are expected to get cancer, and 1 in 3 women. It is the leading cause of death by disease in children under the age of 15. And when you learn those statistics, you can't unlearn them. And again, there are so many factors, and people will argue so many different causes, but when you think about how you treat the soil as how you want to treat your children, we have to value that asset for what it is, not only for the food that comes out of it, but also now, as we are learning, for the powerful role that it plays in climate. So the invitation is really to think really creatively around capital. Some of the conversations that we've had at Replant have been, could you tie cost of capital to the United Nations sustainability goals? And that if a farmer is meeting, one of those different metrics, then there's lower cost of capital. There are so many more creative ways to think about capital. And for some reason, we've allowed financial institutions to be sort of static and stuck in their ways. And what we really need in order to transition farmland to this healthier way of agriculture that not only is protecting the asset of the soil, but it also is protecting the farmers that are living and growing and raising their families on that soil, is we have to think creatively about the capital, because that is the actual first input into any farm system, into any food system. And so if the terms of capital are extractive, which they have been traditionally, then you're building an extractive model. So, it's an interesting time to be having this conversation. We've been having conversations with blockchain experts in cryptocurrency, and I'm not going to pretend to know more than I know on that topic. But what I love about those conversations is that they are inviting in this creativity and this innovation in the way that we think about capital as it associates and ties to soil health. So with New Zealand, as a late adopter to a national organic standard, there's a real opportunity to take these experiences from around the world and to look at the mistakes that we have made here in the United States, and they have been grave. They have been grave. And to recognize where those potholes might be as you determine and build your own standard. And I would say, make sure that soil is part of the conversation. It is something we did not do here. And that farmer who is standing on that soil absolutely knows what has happened to the quality and integrity of that soil over the last 10, 15, or 20 years. The way that we've abused soil here in the US is probably worse than almost anywhere in the world, with the genetically engineered crops and the portfolio of pesticides and insecticides and fungicides and all of these sides that have gone with those genetically engineered crops. It has destroyed the caliber and the quality of the soil, which then also now impacts water quality, water infiltration, runoff, and all of these other issues. So it's really to step back and say, how can we focus on soil health? How can we financially compensate our growers and our farmers for the stewardship of the soil, which is actually, you speak to any farm family and that's what they're passionate about, is building soil health. And in a conversation I had recently with growers here in the United States, they had been conventional, had been growing using this pesticides and portfolio of pesticides for 30 years. And the farmer himself got sick. And as he stepped back and tried to sort of evaluate what could be done, his wife put it more beautifully, I think, than anyone I have ever heard state it. And she said, you know, as farmers, we don't just want to feed the world, we want to nourish it. And so there really is a choice to make this investment up front in soil health and in your food system, so that as you build that National Cancer Center in New Zealand, it is not full, and it is not full of children. Here in the United States, the National Children's Hospitals around the country are growing. And when you step on farm and you see these portfolio of chemicals that these farmers are using, and you ask them what they're seeing in their local hospitals, they will tell you. And so to have this conversation, to bring all players to the table, and you need policy people, you need the bankers there, you need the capital partners there, and the farmer absolutely has to be at the center of this conversation. So I know we have a full slate, and I wanted to make sure to leave some time for Q&A. I'd love to turn it back over to the organizers.
Thanks, Robyn. That's a really interesting conversation. I've just sent a note to everyone, if you've got any questions, to send them through via chat. But just to get us going, Robyn, you talked about bankers. They don't know what they don't know. A lot of other capital players won't know this. How do you create the education on the side of the people that own the capital to engage in this way rather than the way that they have done previously?
Well, you know, it was a conversation on the farm in Palmerston North that I had with a friend who's a banker in New Zealand, and he said, you know, a lot of the farmland in New Zealand now, hedge funds from Asia are coming in and acquiring our farmland. And I thought, food security is national security. And you don't want to be handing that autonomy over to someone out of the country. So what's beautiful about New Zealand, and I think what makes it such an incredible opportunity for you as a country, is that you can bring your policymakers and you can bring those bankers to the farm. And when you stand on those farms and you speak with the farmers and you say, look, we see you using glyphosate over there, and we understand that there now is a global concern with these lawsuits around this pesticide. You know, and they'll say, well, is that a bad word? And I will say, before I give my opinion on this, tell me what you would need to not use these pesticides on this field. And he would turn and say, you know, I need this $350,000 piece of equipment. As I looked at that equipment, I thought, how much is each one of these discs on the bottom of this thing? He said each disc is $6,000. And I thought, how is someone who is carrying millions of dollars in debt, who has a negative farm income, supposed to be able to afford that piece of equipment that would then enable him to transition to regenerative organic agriculture? So the math equation of the capital has to work. And in order for that to begin to work, the capital has to get educated. So really the invitation is reach out to these national banks, reach out to their food and ag divisions, and create events where they can be on farm. And you know, it is a vibrant conversation, and you have to really listen, because a lot of it challenges a lot of belief systems. And sometimes the immediate response is, are you telling me what I am doing is wrong? And really it is, how can we build soil health for New Zealand? How can we build soil health? Because that is in the best interest in terms of climate, in terms of healthy food products for New Zealand. So to put New Zealand first and forward and have that conversation, it does require education, and it does require collaboration. And I think it really does require engaging capital in all of its different groups, the more formal traditional bankers to different impact investment communities, and getting them on farm and having that conversation.
So really getting them on farm and getting them kind of face to face with issues that farmers are facing day to day, right?
Because the farmers themselves, and I mean, New Zealand honors this better than any country, I think, is that these farmers are CEOs of multinational operations. You know, if you're the Bostock brothers and you're shipping stuff out around the world, I mean, that is multinational operation, CEO level decision-making stuff. And to honor our farmers that way, here in the US, we don't do that at all. It's absolutely heartbreaking how the farmer is treated here. So you have to look at this farmer as the businessman or businesswoman and CEO of this operation that he or she actually is.
So, and just on that note, and another question that's come in from Erin is, you know, we're talking on a theoretical level. Can you give us a practical example of a success story replants had in the US?
Right. So what is happening right now in real time in the United States are these partners that we have that we're bringing on, loosely are called technical assistance partners. And so they're developing software programs that allow us to capture this data from the soil. And I mean, again, soil is just this incredible amount of information. It's an incredible database. So as we partner with these different technical assistance partners, and they are able to help us identify these soil metrics, whether we're talking about water conservation or whether we're talking about carbon sequestration, they help us capture those metrics, and then we're able to provide a lower cost of capital. So where we've begun is with dairy, which I know is also of incredible importance in New Zealand. And it's for so many of the same reasons here. It's because of the manure issue. It's because of water quality around these dairy farms. And so to begin by financing through these smarter practices, through these sustainability and regenerative practices, you know, water conservation metrics on these dairy farms. And so again, it's give yourself permission to start small. We don't have to start at some massive scale, but the key is to not make the perfect the enemy of the good and to focus on progress, not perfection. We've all inherited this system that's been operating this way for the last 50, 60, 100 years. So we're not going to change it in the next 2. How do you actually begin the conversation? How can you deploy capital in a way that works for a New Zealand farmer, in a way that works for a farm in the middle of Palmerston North?
And have you got an example of at a farmer level that Replant's been involved with that you can
We
share?
did. So we started with McCarty Family Farms, and they are a dairy farmer with Danone. What we loved about them is Danone is B Corp certified. It's the largest B Corp certified company in North America. And what that meant is that instead of just focusing on shareholders, they could recognize all stakeholders that are part of this conversation, which is you and me, the consumer, the eater. It's the farmer who's the steward of the soil, and it's, you know, this climate conversation. What was interesting is this McCarty Family Farms that they chose to launch in Ohio is just absolute innovation. Here in the United States, genetically engineered crops are everywhere. The farm decided to go non-GMO. The farm is really looking at ways that they can create a closed loop and zero waste and really tackle the manure issue and the methane that's coming off the farm. And so it was financing of biodigesters. And that's been the ask from the farmer is how can we actually capture the methane on farm and actually use that to power the farm? So McCarty Family Farms is probably one of the greatest examples. And what's interesting is that the farm itself decided to go B Corp certified so that the farm itself had that leeway and flexibility to recognize all stakeholders in the system, not just the financial return.
Yeah. And in terms of the capital that came in, were you taking was it capital that you're bringing in as a shareholder, or were you doing it as debt? How did it work?
Yeah, so for our team has Don Schaefer is one of my co-founders, and Dave Haynes is the other co-founder. Don Schaefer was the CEO of RSF Social Finance, and he actually coined the term integrated capital, which allows us to have that flexibility for a capital stack. And again, it's not coming at the farmer and dictating or telling him and her what he needs. It's saying, here are the offerings. Maybe it's debt, maybe it's equity, maybe it's this a loan with these terms, that integrated capital stack from debt to equity, so that we can meet the farmer where he or she is. We're not here to tell them. We're saying, you know, how can we create a loan that actually works for you in this transition? So integrated capital is an important term, I think, and it's something that really is emerging in the impact investment space that we see really needs to become much more of a mainstream concept.
Mm, mm. Okay, I've got a comment from Paul Morgan. He says that he's been having this korero discussion with accountants and bankers for years. And he says nothing in the report system requires reporting on whenua, the soil, the spirit of the soil health. How do we get a system that requires this soil health or this whenua reporting? How do we get that developed?
Exactly. I mean, that's such a great question. And it's kind of crazy that we haven't included things like soil on our balance sheets or water or clean air, because, you know, especially in food and ag, we're nothing without soil, water, and clean air. So the fact that we don't have that total cost model with these things on our balance sheets is nuts. It is why you see this push towards B Corp certification, because then once you're under that certification, you can say, look, we actually are considering climate impact. We are considering environmental assets. We're going beyond just the typical financial metrics and the reporting there. You know, I think in the United States, one of the conversations that kind of circulates a little bit from time to time is that instead of reporting on quarterly earnings, could the food industry step back and say, we're going to do annual reports? Because if it takes 3 to 5 years to convert a piece of farmland from conventional agriculture with all these chemical inputs to organic agriculture, you can't do that on a quarterly earnings model. It's not going to map up with that timeline, and you have this timeline tension. So, you know, I think when you're talking to traditional banks, that's all they know is that timeline, that traditional timeline. And so all they see is that timeline tension. So to me, it's, you know, again, the capital isn't educated. So, you know, we have these conversations, the consumer is actually more educated on organic than the capital. And so the problem is that these banks are using the same metrics they used in 1985. And here we are in 2020 with metrics that, you know, we know are relevant to climate. So instead of, you know, asking questions like, what is your cost of capital for converting farmland to organic? What programs you have in place? What are the loan structures you have in place to convert your farmland to organic? These are real questions in the 21st century that are relevant to food and ag companies in the 21st century. But unfortunately, the investors aren't up to speed on that. So they're still asking the same questions that they asked in 1985.
Yeah.
It's a lot of education. It is a lot of education.
Kia ora.
Kia
ora. I'm Chair of Te Waka Kaiora. And what you're talking about is a process that we have in place called Hua Parakore. And it takes all those things into account when we're going out to look at verifying farmers. The other thing I'd like to say is that as a Māori landowner of my own, I'm on whānau whenua that's not had any inputs probably for 60 plus years that I know of. So for us as Māori, we have a lot of untapped potential land sitting out there. And our desire is to engage those whānau. Not so much, I mean, when you talked about progress versus protection, that's exactly why we're in this business, is that we're about protecting our whenua. It's not about how much money they make of it. It's about how we protect Papatūānuku. So I just want to put that in the mix here. So kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora.
Thank you. Well, you know, I think here in the US, the Amish farmers are probably the closest parallel that we would have, where the land wasn't abused with the chemicals, and that soil is actually incredibly powerful to study. And I would say, you know, clearly I'm sure the scientists at Massey and other schools are studying soil health on these lands as well. But truly, like, you know, when so much soil health has been lost because of the abuse of these chemical practices, and then the addiction that the soils then develop to those chemicals, to be able to have that baseline like you do on that land, that's 60 years of protection, that then can serve as a model in the science.
Yeah.
Do you think that we actually need to change our thinking?
Sorry, guys, we're going to have to keep moving. I know Robyn has to go. We've got a couple more questions. Robyn is on our advisory board. It looks like people would really like to talk with you more, Robyn, and maybe we set up another workshop and just talk about this. And we've got a long way to go in New Zealand. We'd love to help have.
I mean, it's so important to me. I would love to spend more time with all of you and learn from you too, and offer whatever resources and insight that we may have here.
Yeah. So if you are interested in joining with Robyn at a later time, maybe just put something in the chat, a comment in the chat, and we'll make sure that you get included in any correspondence about that. So Robyn, thank you so much for that kororo. Really great to hear from you. Really, really interesting and big mind changes for what we need in New Zealand. I'd like to, thank you very much. I'd like to now introduce Jeff Moyer, CEO of Rodale Institute. He's coming from his evening as well, so thanks very much for joining us. He's a friend of New Zealand as well. He's been here several times, and if he's not on a farm, you'd find him out fishing, I understand. And what a beautiful place to come fishing as well. It's great to have Jeff here. As Robyn was saying, the US is further down this whole regen track than we are. They've made some errors, they've made some really good steps. We really like to hand over to Jeff now to kind of talk about some of that process and and what the learnings are for New Zealand. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to join you this afternoon for you, this evening for me. It's certainly a pleasure to talk to you about organic agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and how we can link those words together and really put New Zealand in the driver's seat to becoming a real powerhouse and a leader in this conversation. I'm glad to hear that Robyn had a lot of questions, because that'll make my job easier. I didn't prepare a whole ton of formal comments, so it'll be fun to hear where the questions lead us. First, let me say that I really believe that words have meaning, words have power, and if partnered with strongly supported and measurable language, can lead to very substantive change. But because we're entering a world of new words, of language and change, I want to talk to you a little bit about my experiences. Not only am I the CEO of Rodale Institute, but I had the privilege of sitting on the U.S. Department of Agriculture's National Organic Standards Board and chaired that committee, was the founder of a certifying agency in organic, and I'm a farmer myself, although I will say that the farming I do today has more to do with managing my grandchildren than with managing anything on the farm, because my son has taken over the reins of our farm at home, transitioned it into a dairy farm. It was a beef operation, grown it quite a bit, and we now have about, we milk about 100 head of certified organic dairy cows. We farm organic potatoes, and our farm is around 500 acres, so not large, but not small either. I also should mention that I do have in all transparency, have a little bit of a vested interest in this conversation, because I'm one of the co-founders of the Regenerative Organic Certification Standard, and I'm the chair of the board of the Regenerative Organic Alliance here in the States, looking at a global standard for regenerative and organic. So just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. If there is, and I'm not suggesting that there necessarily is, but if there is a bright side to the COVID-19 global pandemic that we're all facing, it's really that it's brought out and showcased some of the real frailties and shortcomings of many of our systems. Our healthcare system, for example, has many frailties and is broken. Our energy systems are broken. Our supply chain and logistical systems are broken. And yes, even our food production systems on a global basis are broken and are in need of repair. I really believe that, as Robyn suggested, if you heard her comments, that consumers want and deserve a food system that is designed to be resilient. It should be designed to be transparent. And most importantly, it should be designed with personal health at the very core. but that's not the food system that we have. And in many cases, it's not the food system that's represented by the word organic, unfortunately. And here's why I say that. Because by creating a certification standard like we have around organic, and the Rodale Institute has been was a really early proponent of moving the standard into the governmental legislative regulatory process. But by doing that, in many cases, we've created a very static standard. That can be viewed as a good thing from a farmer's perspective, because like any business, farmers like some stability. It's nice knowing that the standard's not going to change over time. It makes it easier to function. However, it also lends itself to clever individuals and corporate structures that are intent on undermining the standards and creating a process that works to the lowest common denominator. So again, while Robyn was saying learn from our mistakes here in the US and other countries as well, I think there's a huge opportunity here to help design a system that facilitates dynamic change and that conversation. Robert Rodale really saw this coming way back in the 1970s, and as the organic community worked towards national and international recognition for the work that farmers and producers were doing, he also saw that the need was there to create global markets, global trade, and in order to do that, we had to have a standard. I mean, so today we have a $100 billion organic marketplace on a global basis. But again, it only represents about 6% of the food dollars in the US. So while 100 billion sounds like a lot, it's really relatively small. So the industry continues to grow. It continues to attract attention from large-scale investors and big business. Unfortunately, many of them are focused on reducing the concepts of organic to the lowest bar possible. I would argue that they're already doing the same thing with the word regenerative. So they're looking at processes and practices that adhere to the letter of the regulation, because they have to do that to use the word, but not really working towards the intent or the spirit of the regulations, to the point where, you know, the USDA here has an organic standard that does not include the word soil. Even though organic was always a soil-based system, we now can have soilless organic systems, and that's just wrong. But it also creates an opportunity. It's an opportunity to be a catalyst for change, and the regenerative organic system offers a new path, and essentially it's a brand new journey. I want to focus the rest of my comments really on three key pillars that I think New Zealand could take advantage of as it works to capture a leadership position in this journey and helping to set a new path. The one pillar that I'll mention is something that you're going to hear over and over, probably from many of the commenters today, and that's okay, because, you know, I had a college professor once told me, if I say something once, you can probably ignore it. If I say it twice, you should pay attention, and if I say it 3 times, you better bet it's going to be on the test. So you're going to hear things 3 or 4 times today because it's important and it's really going to be on the test. But the first pillar that I want us to focus on is soil health. The second pillar that I want us to focus our attention on is setting a high bar standard, setting that bar high. And then the third pillar is a concept around split ownership. I'll explain to you what I mean by all 3 of those. First, let me say that as a farmer, our goal is relatively simple. It is not to produce food. It is not to kill weeds. It is not to till the soil. It's none of those things. It's to produce healthy people. J.I. Rodale, our founder, way back in 1942, wrote some words on a blackboard, and he said, healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people. What he was telling, he was not a farmer. Initially, he was a businessman, bought a farm because he was of Jewish descent, looking at what was happening to Europe during World War II, and said, part of the problem is Jewish people are not farmers and they can't feed themselves. And so he bought a farm and wanted to consume the food he was producing. And many of the inputs that ag leadership at the time, and currently even today, were telling him to use on his farm were poisons and salt-based fertilizers. So in his mind, he asked a very profound question. He said, how do those tools help make me healthy? And of course, the response was, they don't. And he would say, well, then why use them? That's not the goal. The goal of farmers should be to produce healthy people. So as we think about that linkage, he said, he lived in Manhattan, New York, in an apartment, and he bought a farm. So he went from not even owning a flower pot to owning a farm. And he said, shouldn't the soil have something to do with the equation? And of course, in modern conventional agricultural wisdom, even back then, they said, no, soil has nothing to do with it. It's really about the inputs. So he was launched himself on a career to sort of link human health to soil health. Now, in order to do that, we need to have some regulations, and we need to support incentives that put farmers on a path to soil health. That's the challenge. We don't have a clear definition of healthy soil, nor do we have a clear definition of healthy people. It's a challenge because it's not static, it's very dynamic, and you may feel good today, you may not feel good tomorrow, you may be healthier today than you were yesterday. I don't know, it's hard to say. Soil's the same way. It's not a straight line. It's a trend and a pattern that we look for. But really, we want to start focusing on the solution, not the problem. Soil health is connected to human health through the food that we produce. We cannot divorce ourselves from the soil, but if we focus simply on food and on organic standards, we're going to miss the target. The next pillar, again, is setting a high bar standard. By setting a high bar standard, it's the only way we can achieve, or New Zealand can achieve, a leadership role. It cannot be a race to the bottom, but instead needs to be a guidepost along a path leading to success. This means that staking out practices and principles focused on goals other than simple economics. Look, long-term goals cannot be focused. You can't get to long-term success by focusing on short-term economics. Doesn't mean that short-term economics aren't important, because clearly they are to farmers, but we literally need to regenerate soils, farms, and communities and ourselves while producing the food that we need for a growing population. In fact, regenerative organic systems focused on a high bar represent the only path that we have to long-term success. So we as a society need to figure out how we're going to manage or help to support farmers and incentivize them so that they can achieve the short-term economic goals that they need to do in order to achieve the long-term goals that we as a society need. And then the third pillar is split ownership. By that, I mean we need to figure out who needs to sit at the table, multiple entities that all share in the ownership of the standards that we're going to create. There's a role for government, there's a role for NGOs, and there's a role for brands and CBGs that represent the marketplace. Together, these three types of organizations can represent a structure that protects the standard, yet allows for dynamic change. The USDA standard, for example, has not changed substantially since 1990. That's crazy. Would you buy a car that was built in the 80s and assume that it was state of the art? No, you would not. The standards have changed. We need to figure out a way that manages that change, not in the hands of government agencies, because they're too susceptible to fluctuations and pressure from either administrations or, in the case of the US, lobbying efforts and big business. So we need to give all those entities a voice at the table. We need to give consumers a voice at the table, and we do that through the marketplace. So let's learn from the successes and failures of the organic standards and create a forward-looking dynamic set of regulations that incentivize farmers and yet create a standard that consumers can embrace. So to come full circle in my comments, I really want us to understand that words do have meaning, they do have power. This is not a concept that is lost on others wishing to capitalize on the organic marketplace. Many individuals and organizations, while we're sitting here talking this evening or this afternoon in your case, are working diligently to define the words regenerative and regeneration, much like they did with the word sustainable. These are marketers that are looking at ways to use the word to control the language and to really have a race to the bottom so that they can say that they're regenerative at a lower price point and consumers don't know the difference. So words are important. They do have meaning. The word sustainable today means everything and it means nothing at the same time. The marketers that have now thrown that word aside, and you don't see it on packaging anymore, are gravitating to the word regenerative. They see it standing outside of the word organic, and they're focusing on carbon, strictly on carbon, not soil health, just carbon. So if we can sequester carbon, we're regenerative. Again, that's wrong. What we're really asking people to do is change. We're asking New Zealand to change. We're asking governments to change. Change is hard. Change is stressful, and change takes energy. Even good change. You know, I would hope that getting married is a good change in somebody's life, but it's stressful. Starting a new job is stressful. Transitioning from conventional to organic is stressful. Regenerating farm soils is stressful. And we need to develop tools, again, that help and support farmers to work through that stress. So that really brings me to my final comments, which is around incentivizing adoption of regenerative practices. We can do that through government legislation, and we can do it through marketplace support. We are blessed with a growing population. Yes, some of it, you know, we just heard from Robyn's comments, health-induced, cancer centers, COVID is bringing people to the marketplace looking for a healthier food choice. You know, how many cancer centers around the world suggest that their patients transition to an organic diet? Why do we wait till we have cancer to eat an organic diet? That's crazy when we know it can have preventative measures. So we know we have consumers out there. We also have a population of consumers that are young millennial shoppers. And they come to the marketplace not with a single value, but with a suite of values that need to be embodied in our definition of the word regenerative. That's why our standard, the Regenerative Organic Alliance standard, the ROC standard, focuses in on some additional pillars around social justice. We see that in the news across the world and around the globe, around the need to include social justice, as well as animal welfare when we're thinking about soil health. So we've included those pillars. So again, before we, as we launch into some questions here, I hope, again, I want to focus on those three pillars: healthy soil, focusing on always keeping soil in mind, setting the standard high, because that's how change happens. That's how people take a leadership role. Nobody tunes into the Olympics at all this year, but if you were, you would tune in to see people setting a high bar. No, I'm only 5'6", so any bar is high for me to jump over. But if you go to the Olympics, nobody wants to see somebody jump over a bar 2 feet off the ground. We can almost all do that. You want to see somebody set a high bar standard. And if I was a young person watching the Olympics, and I was watching somebody do the high bar jump, and when I was in high school, we learned to jump over the high bar 1 foot first, and the bar passed under your chest. If you were successful, your other leg came over the bar and you landed on your back in a cushion on the other side. And around 1972, along comes a guy named Fallsbury who jumped over the bar head first, not feet first. Instead of the bar going under his chest, it went under his back, and suddenly he was jumping feet more than everybody else. You can't find anybody that jumps over the bar the old way. Everybody jumps over it the new way. And what we're talking about doing with Regenerative Organic is setting the high bar, changing the way we jump over the bar, and encouraging people to follow us. And then the last pillar, again, is split ownership to protect the integrity of the words that we choose to describe what we mean by regenerative organic agriculture and how we can bring the farm and the public into that conversation. And with that, I'd like to open the discussion, if you're willing, to some questions and hopefully some answers.
Thanks, Jeff. That's a really interesting conversation as we go through our own certification process. And I'd just like to welcome Barbara Kruger into the conversation, who's chair of the select committee that is managing our development of our certification process here. So I'm sure she's really appreciating your comments, and she's nodding as I'm saying this. I don't, questions from people, maybe I can just set a couple to get you going. You've got those three bars or three pillars that we need to work on. In the States, where what's the demand for regenerative organic versus organic? Has the conversation, do consumers see that difference, and how widespread is that?
Consumers see what we show them. So consumers today, regenerative organic is brand new. And so the concept around that is probably foreign to consumers. Farmers are ahead of the curve here, because farmers have been hearing about the word regenerative for the last several years.
Yeah.
But that's because whenever they go to a workshop or a seminar, they're hearing the word, they don't know what it means, and it's being described in many different ways. We are really leaning heavily on brands and CPG companies to help us carry that message into the marketplace.
Sorry, CPG?
Consumer packaged goods.
Okay.
So it's a brand product. You know, for example, Patagonia is one of our key partners in moving the conversation around regenerative organic into the marketplace. They have a huge following. Millions and millions of people follow them on social media. I mean, most farmers don't grow crops and market them on social media. Patagonia does. So Patagonia can touch millions and millions, if not hundreds of millions of people with their conversation almost on a daily basis. And people follow them. So by including the words regenerative organic in their space, it allows us to move the conversation from the farm into the marketplace rather quickly. So we need those partners in order to get the message out to consumers. I will say that consumers come to the marketplace, as I mentioned, with a whole suite of values, not one value. So if you go to the marketplace and you say clean water, fresh air, healthy soil is important to me, and I look at a product that says regenerative, and I think, oh, that means healthy soil. And then I see a product that says organic, and they go, yeah, I think that means no pesticides. Why are those two products not connected? Now you're forcing a consumer to make a decision. Do I buy something that pulls on my heartstrings around environmental health, or do I buy something that I think has the persona of personal health? I want them both. Why can't we have them both? Or social justice is an important issue to me. I want to know. Here's a real life situation with Patagonia. They make an organic cotton. This is a Patagonia shirt, by the way. It is not a $200 shirt, but it's an expensive shirt. If I bought this organic cotton shirt, I want to be assured that the cotton in this shirt was not harvested in Turkey by 10-year-old girls that were forbidden to go to school because they had to work in the field. That can be certified as organic because the certified organic standard says nothing about social justice, completely silent on that issue. But yet as a consumer, that's important to me. So why can't we have a standard that looks at a broader picture of high bars that are important? So social justice is an important pillar. We have farmers, you know, one farmer I think said it best to me. He said, I don't know if you have Boy Scouts in New Zealand. I'm not enough.
We do.
But when you're a Boy Scout, you get merit badges. Girl Scouts probably do the same thing, but I'll pick on Boy Scouts because I was a Boy Scout, but I was like one of the worst Boy Scouts in the world. They literally asked me to leave the group because I was too disruptive. Probably why I made a good organic farmer. But if you're a Boy Scout, you have all these merit badges all over your sash. Well, the farmer said, that's what I feel like. I'm fair trade, I'm social justice, I'm halal, I'm organic, I'm clean soil, I'm clean water. But when you're a Boy Scout and you go far enough along and you become an Eagle Scout, that's the only badge you wear. You just wear one badge because everybody knows that in order to get that badge, you had to earn like 200 merit badges to do it. So the farmer said to me, why can't I just have one badge that says I do everything right? That's what regenerative organic should be. It should be that one badge that takes into account all the things that consumers are shopping for and shopping with, all those values, pull them together into one standard. That's what we need to do. That's what New Zealand can do because you're not constrained by existing protocols and regulations and legislation.
Yeah, for sure, we've got that opportunity right now with our organic standard to incorporate regenerative into it. Yeah. So just a couple of questions. Someone's after your Eagles badge. Are you planning to expand the regenerative organic certification to overseas producers, for example, New Zealand?
It already is. One of our first producers was in Ghana, and that was coconut palm oil production. We've got, when we built the system, we test marketed it in our pilot phase around the world. So we've got farms in Argentina, Brazil, Africa. We're just now getting a product onto the market shelves. Nature's Path has a granola bar that's regenerative organic certified. So we're just getting started on all that. But really, it's our standard is designed to work with plant-based agriculture, animal-based agriculture, and it's a global standard. So it's a real challenge to build. You're welcome to take a look at that standard. It's on the website of Regenerative Organic Alliance on their homepage. You can join in, you can copy, steal, whatever it is you want. That's what it's there for.
Mm.
Jeff, where do you see Indigenous models sitting?
Indigenous models? I'm not sure
Yes.
what you mean. Well,
we have developed a Indigenous verification process.
Yeah, I think that would certainly fit under our social justice pillar and would be a component that you could easily weave in there.
Well, as Māori producers, we cover all those three pillars when I look at our verification process.
Yeah, what we did when we built, what we did when we built our standard was we didn't create, in certain areas, we didn't create a lot of new language. On the soil health pillar, we did. With the social justice pillar, we just took very well vetted language around social justice certification agencies that exist and just molded it into ours. So we're as guilty of stealing as anybody else. So there's great language out there. Why create something brand new? And that's why I say if you steal it from me, you're not really stealing anything that I didn't already do.
Thanks very much. Just a couple more questions. I know we're really tight on time, but the questions coming through. One from Chirasella. How do we get over the perception that organics is prescriptive and hard and not focused on outcomes? How do either of those, regenerative or regenerative organic?
It's a very good question, and I don't want to take up too much time. I know we're time limited, and I'm happy to come back and talk again or talk any way you want. But the problem you have with basing something on outcomes is, we based our standard on practices because we know if we follow practices, we're going to get the outcomes. But if you base it on outcomes, you really focused your standard on cheating. I don't care who you are or where you are, you're going to try and get that outcome at the lowest cost possible. For example, if it's based on carbon here in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania is historically a coal mining state. I can get coal dust, which is pure carbon. It's a contaminant, it's a pollutant, but I can put it on my field and I can test the outcome, and overnight I will sequester more carbon than you can possibly imagine, and it's wrong because that's what cheating does, that's what outcomes do. If you base it on outcomes, you look at Lance Armstrong, the great bike rider. All he did was took steroids and then tried to mask it with something else because he was cheating to get the outcome. That's wrong. But if you base it on practices, you can make it work. And that's why I don't think it's a hurdle that we can overcome completely.
Yeah. Okay. And then on that note, this one from Donald, who's from BioGrow, one of our certifiers here in New Zealand. Are you approving the certifiers or, are you doing the certification or are you approving certifiers to do the audits and certifications on your behalf?
What we've done in the U.S. is we're working along with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Internationally, we're working with IFOAM's family of certification standards to act as an accreditor. We are not the certifier. We want to work with existing certification agencies. A certification agency, just like the one you're talking about, is really a service provider to the farm. We do not intend to break that chain or that link between the producer or the farmer and their certification agency, but rather add to their portfolio of services that they can provide.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Jeff. And we've run out of time. Really great to have you here. Really good insights, really timely for us right now. We'd love to have you back and engaging with us further, and it's looking like we've got questions to that effect as well. So again, if people are interested in linking up with Jeff Moyer further, maybe put your comments into the chat, and we'll make sure that you again get included in any future conversations. It looks like there's a few. So Jeff, thanks again. Thank you very much for being part of the korero this afternoon. Great to have you here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, and take care of all my fish out there.
For sure.